usually when we talk about achieving a massive life goal, we expect like a cinematic movie montage. You know the exact kind I mean.
Oh, absolutely. The classic 80s training sequence.
Right, exactly.
Right.
You decide you're going to get in shape or finally write that novel, and the inspiring music just swells up in the background. You sweat a lot on a treadmill, you type furiously late into the night, maybe drink raw eggs from a glass.
Yep, the whole Rocky routine.
Yeah, and then suddenly, boom, you are a completely new, transformed person.
It's a really compelling narrative, honestly. I mean, we are wired to love a dramatic before and after story where someone just flips a binary switch.
Right.
You were one way yesterday, and today you're completely different.
See, the underlying belief there is that massive action equals massive results. It's clean, it makes for a great story.
It does, but the reality of behavioral science is that transformation doesn't happen to a soundtrack.
Oh, unfortunate.
Right. It happens in the boring, kind of invisible moments. When you step into the actual day-to-day reality of trying to change a habit, that movie montage just stops playing.
Yeah, suddenly you're staring at this graveyard of broken promises to yourself. You try to wake up early, you fail, and you end up blaming your own lack of willpower.
Which is literally the absolute definition of a frustrating cycle. We think we are fundamentally broken or lazy.
Like it's a character flaw.
Exactly. We think we're the problem. But in reality, the way we're approaching the entire concept of change is what's actually flawed.
So today, we are tearing down that myth of massive action. We're going to look at the actual neurology of routines.
And we're unpacking why the most popular habit-building advice in the world might be brilliant, but, also might be ignoring some major psychological reality.
Right. We have a huge stack of research for today's deep dive. It's centered heavily on James Clear's framework from his massive bestseller, Atomic Habits.
But we aren't just reading the highlights, we're going much deeper.
Yeah, we're bringing in heavy-hitting cognitive science and some really sharp critiques from habit researchers and academic journals, because the mission today is to give you a beginner-friendly, jargon-free guide to rewiring your daily routines.
We want to examine the actual science of why we do what we do, and more importantly, how you can practically change it without relying on a sudden burst of motivation.
So if you're listening to this feeling guilty about that gym membership you haven't used since January, or the language app you abandoned on day 3, this deep dive is going to completely change how you view your own willpower.
Oh, for sure.
We're going to take this incredibly slowly. We're using simple everyday language to break down the 4 laws of behavior change. That way you can start applying these ideas the minute this conversation ends.
I love that.
So let's start with the foundation, the phrase itself, atomic habits. When most people hear atomic, they think of an explosion, right? They think of massive energy.
Which is actually ironic, because the scientific definition of an atom is the exact opposite of massive.
Right, it's tiny.
Exactly. An atom is a fundamental, extremely small unit of matter. It's literally a building block. You can't even see it with the naked eye.
Okay.
So when we talk about an atomic habit, we're talking about an extremely small amount of a behavior. A tiny, almost invisible routine.
Like something you wouldn't even notice yourself doing.
Yeah, basically. But just like atoms combine to form molecules and then molecules build complex structures, these tiny behavioral building blocks stack up. They stack on top of each other to generate enormous results over time.
See, we are so conditioned to believe that if we want to change our lives, we need to make huge, sweeping changes.
We really are.
We tell ourselves, starting Monday, I'm going to work out for 2 hours every single day, and I'm never eating sugar again.
The classic 0 to 100 approach.
Yes, we go from 0 to 100. But the math behind Atomic Habits tells a completely different story. And the math relies on a concept called the 1% rule.
Let's break down the compounding effect of getting just 1% better at something. I mean, we all understand compound interest when it comes to money in a bank account, right?
Right. A small amount of money grows over time because the interest builds on top of the interest.
Exactly. And the same mathematical principle applies to human behavior. If you improve a skill or just a daily routine by 1% every single day for 1 year, you don't just end up 365% better.
Wait, really?
Yeah, because of that compounding effect, you actually end up 37 times better than when you started.
37 times better. That is wild. And not by moving mountains, just by being one tiny fraction better each day.
Yes. But the sobering reality is that the reverse is also mathematically true.
Oh, no.
Yeah, if you slip by 1% every day, like if you make a tiny poor decision, skip a routine, or degrade a skill just a fraction of a percent daily, you decline nearly all the way down to 0 over that same year.
Wow. So habits really are the compound interest of self-improvement. What starts as a small, insignificant choice accumulates over time into a massive difference in outcome.
That's the perfect way to phrase it.
But this math, it completely upends how we think about goals.
Yeah.
Because we are a society obsessed with the finish line.
Oh, completely.
We write down goals like lose 20 pounds or make $1 million or run a marathon. But focusing on the goal seems to be the very thing tripping us up.
It does, and this requires a major shift in our perspective. James Clear makes a very sharp, defining distinction here between goals and systems.
Okay, let's unpack that.
A goal is the specific outcome you want to achieve. The system is the daily process that leads to that outcome. So the goal is crossing the finish line of the marathon, but the system is the mundane schedule of your training runs every Tuesday and Thursday morning.
I see. So the goal gives you a direction, but the system is the vehicle that actually gets you there.
Yes, exactly.
There's actually a quote from the source material that really anchors this entire philosophy. It says, "You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems."
I'd argue that is the most important concept in the entire book.
Really? Why?
Well, think about a sporting event. The winners and the losers usually have the exact same goals.
Oh, that's true.
Right. Every single athlete standing at the starting line of the Olympic sprint wants to win the gold medal. The desire to win, the goal itself, doesn't separate the winner from the loser.
Because they all have it.
Exactly. What differentiates the person standing on the podium is the system they followed for the 4 years prior to that race. So if you're struggling to change your daily habits, you aren't the problem. The system you're operating within is the problem.
Let me try out an analogy here to see if I'm grasping just how vital these tiny systemic shifts are.
Go for it.
Imagine a cross-country flight. Let's say you're the pilot of a plane taking off from Los Angeles, and your goal is to land in New York City.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you shift the nose of the plane just a few degrees south, right at takeoff, like a tiny invisible adjustment that the passengers wouldn't even feel, you aren't going to land in New York.
Right, you end up somewhere entirely different.
Yeah, you're going to land in Washington, D.C.
That's a great way to visualize it. The initial shift is imperceptible, but as the plane travels across the country, that tiny angular difference compounds over thousands of miles.
So the ultimate destination changes entirely based on a microscopic shift at the start.
Exactly. Your daily habits are the trajectory of your life.
But, I'm looking at Dr. Gina Cleo's notes here from our research, and she actually tears into this 1% math a little bit.
She does. It's a very fair critique.
Yeah, I have to admit, human behavior isn't an airplane. An airplane operates on strict aerodynamics and computer guidance. My life does not feel like a neat mathematical formula.
Very few lives do.
Right. I have chaotic days, I get sick, I get tired. So how does Clear's clean compounding model survive the messy reality of being a human?
That is a vital piece of friction to introduce here. Dr. Cleo is a prominent habit researcher, and she points out that the 1% rule is a fantastic motivational metaphor, but we shouldn't confuse it with literal science.
So we aren't actual calculators.
No, we really aren't. Human beings are not bank accounts gathering compound interest.
So the 37 times better math is more, poetry than physics.
Essentially, yes. Dr. Cleo emphasizes that real human progress is highly nonlinear. It never looks like a smooth, perfectly upward curving graph.
What does it look like then?
In reality, progress looks like a messy scribble. You have days where you leap forward and you have weeks where you slide backward. You hit plateaus where you're putting in the work, but nothing seems to change for a month. It's chaotic.
Okay, that feels much more relatable.
Furthermore, she pushes back gently on the idea that we should completely abandon goals to focus only on systems.
Because without a goal, you don't know where to point the system, right?
Yeah.
Like you still need to know you want to go to New York.
Exactly. Dr. Cleo's research indicates that having clear, challenging goals remains incredibly powerful for maintaining your long-term motivation. Systems are how you walk the path, but the goal is the compass pointing you north.
So they work symbiotically. You can't discard one for the other.
Right, they need each other.
So if we accept that progress is a messy scribble and not a perfect 1% upward curve, how do we keep from giving up?
That's the hardest part.
It's like when I hit that messy plateau, or when I slide backward and skip my workout 3 days in a row, what stops me from throwing my hands in the air and saying, well, I tried, but I'm just not a fitness person?
To survive the messy scribble, you have to go much deeper than just changing what you do. You have to change how you see yourself.
What do you mean by that?
You have to undergo an identity change.
Okay, this brings us to the concept of identity-based habits. The core idea running through these sources is that true behavior change is fundamentally identity change.
Yes.
Your current behaviors, the good ones and the bad ones, are simply a reflection of the person you subconsciously believe you are.
Exactly. If you want to make a habit stick long term, focusing on the outcome isn't enough. The outcome is temporary. The identity is permanent.
Let's break down the difference between outcome-based habits and identity-based habits with a very simple example. Let's say two different people are trying to quit smoking.
Okay.
Someone offers the first person a cigarette and say, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." That's outcome-based.
Yeah.
They still believe they are a smoker who's currently attempting to do something different.
But the second person, when offered the cigarette, says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker."
Oh, wow. That's a huge difference.
It is. It's a tiny shift in language, but it represents a monumental shift in self-image. They no longer identify with the behavior.
So they aren't trying to be something else.
Right. They have declared that their core identity has changed.
The power of that language shift is wild, because when you focus on the outcome, you're just chasing a temporary state. But when you shift your identity, your actions naturally align with your new beliefs, because our brains hate cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. If you truly believe I'm a writer, then sitting down at a blank page every morning isn't some agonizing chore that requires massive willpower.
It's simply what a writer does.
Right. James Clear uses a framework for this that I find incredibly practical. He says that every single action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become.
A vote. I like that. So every time you sit down and study a new language for 5 minutes, you're casting a ballot for the identity of, I am a learner.
Yes.
Every time you choose a side salad instead of French fries, you cast a vote for, I am a healthy person.
And what's liberating about the voting metaphor is how forgiving it is. Think about a real election. A candidate doesn't need a unanimous 100% vote to win the office.
They just need a majority.
Exactly.
That completely removes the pressure of perfection. If I eat a donut on a Tuesday, I haven't ruined my life. I just cast one single vote for my old identity.
Precisely. And as long as you cast more votes for the healthy identity throughout the rest of the week, the new identity still wins the election.
So the small wins build up physical evidence to prove your new identity to yourself. Your brain stops relying on hope and starts relying on the data you're providing it.
You're giving your brain proof.
But I have to play devil's advocate here, because I think anyone listening who has struggled with deep-seated habits is feeling a sense of skepticism right now.
Sure. Lay it on me.
Let's say I have literally never been a runner in my entire life. I absolutely hate running.
Okay.
If I jog around my block for 5 minutes, I can't just look in the mirror and say, I am a runner. My brain knows I'm lying. It feels delusional to claim an identity when I have 30 years of evidence proving the exact opposite.
That makes total sense. Your brain is highly logical in that regard, which is why you can't just forcefully adopt a new identity overnight. Your brain will reject it without proof.
So what do you do?
Well, that is the exact reason why these habits must be atomic. The seed of a new identity is a tiny, undeniable decision. You're right. If you jog for 5 minutes on a Monday, you don't believe you're a runner. But if you jog for 5 minutes every single day for 30 consecutive days, your brain can't argue with the data anymore. The evidence becomes undeniable.
Oh, I see. So the belief doesn't come first. The action comes first.
Exactly.
I thought I needed to believe I was a runner before I could start running, but it's the other way around.
Action always precedes belief. If you do it consistently, the evidence builds up, and the new identity naturally follows the action. You show up, you cast the tiny votes, and eventually the new identity takes office.
Okay, so the philosophical foundation is set. We know we need to build systems, cast small votes, and focus on tiny changes to shift our identity over time.
Right.
But we need to move from philosophy into the actual mechanics. How do we build this system? To understand that, we have to look under the hood of our own neurology. We have to deconstruct the habit loop.
This is where we get into the neurological machinery that drives almost everything we do. Our brains are incredibly efficient, energy-saving engines.
I want to break this down using some insights from the behavioral science sources we pulled, including a really good deep dive from Psychology Today.
Yeah, they break it down beautifully.
They explain that a habit is basically a neurological feedback loop. It's a cycle that consists of 4 simple sequential steps: cue, craving, response, and reward.
But before we define those 4 steps, let's talk about the hardware of the brain itself.
Okay, yeah. What is physically happening when a habit is formed?
Let's look at how the brain uses energy. conscious thought like analyzing a situation, making a decision, choosing an action burns a massive amount of glucose.
It's tiring.
It is. The brain wants to conserve that energy for real emergencies. So it's always looking for ways to automate repetitive behaviors.
To put things on autopilot.
Exactly. When you repeat an action enough times, the brain takes that action and moves it out of the conscious decision-making centers and into a deeper, older part of the brain called the basal ganglia, and specifically a region within it called the striatum.
Okay, for someone who hasn't taken a biology class in 20 years, what does the basal ganglia actually do?
Think of it as the brain's actual autopilot system. It links sensory triggers with physical actions so you don't have to waste energy thinking. The classic example is learning to drive a car.
Oh, yeah.
The first time you sat behind the wheel, it was exhausting. You had to consciously think about how hard to press the brake, checking the mirrors, the feel of the steering wheel, all the cars around you. Your brain was working in overdrive.
Oh, man, I remember gripping the wheel so tight my hands hurt. But flash forward 10 years, and you can drive all the way to work, park the car, and realize you don't actually remember a single moment of the commute.
Exactly. You were lost in thought the whole time.
Your conscious mind was thinking about what to make for dinner, while your basal ganglia literally drove the car.
Yes. And physically, what's happening is that the neural pathways connecting those driving actions are getting thicker. A fatty substance called myelin wraps around the neurons, making the electrical signals travel faster and more efficiently. The habit becomes physically hardwired into your biology.
So a habit isn't just a mental preference. It's a thickened, heavily insulated electrical cable in your brain.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And the brain wires these cables using the 4-step feedback loop you mentioned earlier.
Let's walk through that loop with a highly relatable everyday example.
Let's do it.
Step 1 is the cue. The cue is the trigger. It's a piece of information that tells your brain to initiate a behavior. So imagine your phone buzzes on the kitchen counter. That auditory buzz is the cue.
And step 2 is the craving. The craving is the motivational force. It's the underlying reason you act. Now, this is crucial. You don't actually crave the habit itself.
Wait, what do you mean?
You crave the change in internal state that the habit delivers. When your phone buzzes, you don't crave the physical act of swiping a glass screen. You crave the feeling of knowing who messaged you. You crave the social connection or the relief of curiosity.
Okay, that makes sense. And then step 3 is the response. The response is the actual action or habit you perform. So you reach your hand out, pick up the phone, and read the text message.
And finally, step 4 is the reward. The reward is the end goal of every single habit. The reward satisfies the craving. You read the message, your curiosity is satisfied, and your brain releases a chemical called dopamine.
Ah, dopamine. We hear about that all the time.
We do, and dopamine is often misunderstood just as a pleasure chemical, but it's actually a learning signal.
Learning signal.
Yeah, when that dopamine hits, it stamps a memory in your brain that says, hey, whatever action you just took to get this feeling, remember it. Do it again next time you hear that buzz.
Cue, craving, response, reward. The phone buzzes. I feel the desire to read the message. I pick up the phone. My curiosity is satisfied, and the loop is closed.
And once that exact sequence happens a few dozen times, the myelin sheath thickens, the basal ganglia takes over, and it becomes an ironclad automatic habit.
It becomes almost involuntary. And the most important takeaway from this neurological loop is this. If a behavior falls short in any of these 4 stages, it will not become a habit.
Right, it breaks down.
If you eliminate the cue, the habit never even initiates. If you reduce the craving, you won't have enough motivation to act. If you make the response too physically difficult, you won't be able to do it. And if the reward fails to satisfy your desire, your brain won't bother remembering it for next time.
You've got it perfectly. And if we know exactly how the machine operates, we can reverse engineer it, we can dismantle the loops that are hurting us, and we can intentionally build loops that help us.
And this brings us to the absolute core of our deep dive today, the 4 laws of behavior change. These are the practical, everyday rules you can use to hack that 4-step biological loop.
These 4 laws are the tools you use to redesign your reality.
Let's start with law number 1, which targets the first step of the loop, the cue. The first law is make it obvious.
If you want to start a new good habit, the trigger needs to be staring you in the face. It needs to be impossible to ignore.
Because we like to think we are in complete control of our choices, right?
We do, but our physical environment often shapes our behavior far more than our willpower ever could.
Let's look at some deeply practical ways to make a habit obvious. The first is a psychological concept called implementation intention. This was developed by psychologist Peter M. Gollwitzer.
It's a very powerful concept.
And the core of it is that you cannot rely on vague intentions. You can't just tell yourself, I'm going to eat healthier or I'm going to exercise more. The brain doesn't know what to do with more. It's too fuzzy. There's no cue.
You have to give your basal ganglia a specific time and location. An implementation intention forces you to use a very specific formula.
What's the formula?
It goes like this. If situation X occurs, I will perform action Y. Or, even simpler, I will perform this specific behavior at this specific time in this specific location.
So don't say, I'll exercise. Say, I will do 20 minutes of yoga at 6:40 a.m. on the living room rug.
Yeah.
You have now created a crystal clear cue.
Exactly. Another powerful technique for making a cue obvious is called habit stacking. I love this one because it leverages the neurological pathways you've already built.
So it uses the habits you already do every single day as the trigger for new ones.
Yes. You're taking a brand new fragile behavior and tying it to an old, heavily myelinated, reliable behavior. The formula here is, after I do my current habit, I will immediately do my new habit.
Give me a real-world scenario of habit stacking.
Okay, let's say your goal is to start a daily meditation practice, but you always, quote-unquote, forget because there's no cue. You can stack it. Think of something you do every single morning without fail.
Brewing a cup of coffee.
Perfect. So your habit stack becomes, after I press the start button on the coffee maker, I will immediately sit at the kitchen table and meditate for 1 minute while the coffee brews.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Pressing the start button is the old habit. It happens automatically. It now becomes the obvious, undeniable cue for the new habit.
The cue is baked right into your routine. The sources also talk heavily about environment design. The Psychology Today article really stressed this.
Yeah, environment design is huge.
If your goal is to drink more water, don't rely on remembering to walk to the sink. Fill up a massive water bottle and put it squarely in the middle of your desk, right next to your keyboard. You literally cannot miss it. Make it violently obvious.
But what if we want to do the opposite? What if we have a bad habit we want to destroy?
You simply invert the law. If the first law of building a habit is make it obvious, the law for breaking a bad habit is make it invisible. You remove the cue entirely.
If you come home from work and immediately eat half a box of cookies, don't try to use willpower to stare at the cookie jar and resist it. Hide the jar in the back of the highest cabinet. Or, better yet, don't buy them at the grocery store.
Make the cue invisible.
Exactly. If your phone is distracting you from your work, don't just put it face down on the desk. Put it in another room on silent.
Because self-control is highly overrated as a long-term strategy, right? Willpower is like a muscle. It gets fatigued.
It definitely does.
It takes vastly less energy to remove the temptation from your environment entirely than it does to stare at it and actively resist it for 8 hours a day. Fix the environment and the behavior often fixes itself.
Exactly. Now let's move to law number 2. This targets the second step of the loop, the craving. The second law is make it attractive.
The more attractive or appealing an opportunity is, the more likely your brain is to form a habit around it. We are driven by the anticipation of a reward.
Notice you said anticipation, not the reward itself. The dopamine spike actually happens when you anticipate the reward, not just when you receive it.
So how do we make a boring, tedious habit like paying bills or cleaning the house more attractive? How do we manufacture a craving?
The sources highlight a fantastic strategy here called temptation bundling. This comes from the research of behavioral economist Catherine Milkman.
Okay, how does temptation bundling work?
It works by taking an action you deeply want to do and linking it to an action you need to do. You bundle them together so they occur at the exact same time.
So if I desperately need to clean my disaster of a garage, but all I actually want to do is listen to the newest episode of my favorite true crime show, I bundle them. I make a strict rule for myself. I'm only allowed to listen to that specific show while I'm cleaning the garage.
Exactly. The anticipation of the audio makes the chore attractive.
It's important to distinguish temptation bundling from another concept mentioned in the literature, which is the Premack principle. This is named after psychologist David Premack. You might know this colloquially as Grandma's rule.
Eat your broccoli first, and then you get ice cream.
Exactly. The key difference here is the timing. Temptation bundling is doing the want and the need simultaneously. The Premack principle is doing the need first and receiving the want afterward as a conditional reward.
Both leverage your brain's desire for pleasure to pull you through a difficult task.
And just like the first law, we invert this to break a bad habit. The inversion of make it attractive is make it unattractive.
Right.
You actively highlight the negative aspects of the bad habit to change your internal narrative about it. You focus on how terrible you feel after doom scrolling for 2 hours.
Now, this is a critical moment in our deep dive where we need to slow down and address a major piece of conflicting evidence.
Yeah, this is important.
This is where Dr. Gina Cleo's critique adds some profound, necessary nuance to James Clear's framework.
I'm really glad we're bringing this in now, because the idea of just making it unattractive assumes that humans operate with pure logic. It assumes we only do bad things because they look fun. What does Dr. Cleo point out?
Well, Clear's framework generally assumes that habits are built on a simple, feel-good reward loop. You eat a cookie, it tastes good, you do it again.
Simple enough.
But Dr. Cleo argues that a massive percentage of our most stubborn, destructive habits are not born from a desire to feel good. They are born from trauma, chronic stress, profound anxiety, or fear.
We're talking about things like intense emotional eating, or doom scrolling the news to the point of a panic attack, or actively avoiding social situations.
Yes, those behaviors are not providing a reward in the traditional pleasurable sense. They are providing a temporary numbness. They are a deeply ingrained coping mechanism to distract from acute psychological pain.
Wow.
For those types of deeply rooted behaviors, Dr. Cleo argues that you cannot just hack your environment. Hiding the cookies or deleting an app doesn't cure the anxiety driving the behavior.
That is such a vital distinction. You can't life hack your way out of unaddressed trauma. If you're emotional eating because your job is destroying your mental health, moving the junk food to a higher shelf might stop you for a day, but the stress will eventually override the friction.
It absolutely will.
For deep-seated coping mechanisms, the work is much harder than just making a cue invisible. It requires investigating the why behind the pain, which often means seeking professional therapy.
It's a sobering reminder that while these 4 laws are magnificent tools for redesigning our daily routines, human psychology is profoundly complex. We have to apply these behavioral hacks with an enormous amount of self-compassion.
That context is really crucial. Let's keep moving through the loop, keeping that compassion in mind. We're on part 2 of the 4 laws. We've made the cue obvious and we've made the craving attractive. Now we hit the physical action itself.
Law number 3 targets the response. The law is, make it easy.
This is grounded in the biological law of least effort. As we discussed, human beings are naturally wired to conserve energy. If there are 2 paths to a destination, we will instinctively, biologically, gravitate toward the path that requires the least amount of work.
So the goal here is to ruthlessly reduce the friction associated with your good habits. If you want to go for a run at 6:00, don't wake up at 6 a.m. and then start digging through your dark closet looking for a clean pair of socks.
You're adding steps. You're adding friction.
Exactly. Instead, pack your gym bag, lay out your clothes, and put your car keys on top of your running shoes the night before. You've removed the friction.
And conversely, you intentionally increase the friction for your bad habits. If you realize you're watching 4 hours of television every night, don't just turn the TV off. Unplug it from the wall. Take the batteries out of the remote control and put them in a drawer in the kitchen.
That seems a little extreme.
It feels extreme, but think about the psychology. When you're tired at 8 p.m., the sheer effort of having to walk to the kitchen, find the batteries, put them in the remote, and plug the heavy TV back into the wall creates enough friction that your lazy brain says, you know what, it's not worth the effort. Let's just read a book.
You're using your brain's natural laziness to your advantage. I love it. Now, within this 3rd law is perhaps the most famous and most actionable piece of advice in the entire Atomic Habits ecosystem.
What's that?
It is called the 2-minute rule. For anyone who struggles with chronic procrastination, this rule is an absolute game changer. The rule simply states, when you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do.
You take your massive, intimidating ambition and you scale it down into a microscopic 2-minute version. If your overarching goal is to read a book every week, the 2-minute rule scales that down to read 1 single page before bed.
If the goal is clean the entire house, it becomes put away 1 dish. If it's do 45 minutes of strenuous yoga, the 2-minute habit is simply take my yoga mat out of the closet and unroll it.
The logic here is that the hardest part of any task is crossing the starting line. It's the transition from doing nothing to doing something. Once you start, momentum takes over, and it's usually easy to keep going.
That starting friction is the killer.
Right. The 2-minute rule forces you to lower the bar so much that you can't possibly say no. You are mastering the art of just showing up.
There is a phrase James Clear uses that perfectly captures this. Standardize before you optimize. You cannot improve a habit that doesn't exist.
That makes total sense.
You can't worry about the perfect workout routine or the perfect running stride if you haven't even established the basic routine of putting on your shoes. You have to establish the presence of the habit first, even if it's comically small.
But I'm going to push back here because when I first encountered the 2-minute rule, my immediate reaction was, this is just a cheap mental trick. My brain is smart. It knows my real goal is to sweat for an hour. Will my brain just reject the idea of unrolling the yoga mat because it knows the hour of physical pain is coming right after? It feels like lying to myself.
That is a very common, very logical pushback. Our brains do resist being tricked. And James Clear has a brilliant counterintuitive piece of advice for this exact scenario.
Oh, really?
He says, if the 2-minute rule feels forced, or if it feels like a transparent trick, then you must stop after 2 minutes.
Wait, I don't understand. Just stop entirely.
Yes, you make the 2 minutes the entire goal. He tells a true story about a reader who wanted to lose over 100 pounds. This man started going to his local gym, but he made a strict, unbreakable rule for himself. He was not allowed to stay inside the gym for longer than 5 minutes.
He drove his car all the way to the gym, walked inside, and then forced himself to leave after 5 minutes.
Every single day, he would walk in, maybe do half a dozen bicep curls or walk on the treadmill for 3 minutes, and then he would literally force himself to walk out the door and drive home.
That's crazy.
He did this for weeks, and what happened psychologically was profound. He removed all the dread, all the pressure, and all the decision fatigue. Going to the gym was no longer a massive, exhausting mountain that he had to climb. It was just a quick, easy, mundane errand.
Oh, I see. He was casting votes.
Precisely. He was casting daily, undeniable votes for his new identity as someone who goes to the gym. He was building trust with himself. After a month of this, the habit was wired. He found himself at the gym and thought, well, I'm already here. The hard part is over. The friction is gone. I might as well stay for 10 minutes today.
Wow.
And over a few years, he lost all the weight. The trick wasn't a trick. He established the identity first, and the optimization came later.
That is an incredible reframing of how we approach effort. Okay, let's bring it home with the final law. Law number 4 targets the final stage of the loop, the reward. The law is, make it satisfying.
This law is deeply rooted in the history of psychology, specifically B.F. Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. Skinner put animals in boxes and proved a fundamental law of behavior. Actions that are immediately followed by a reward are repeated. Actions that are immediately followed by a punishment are avoided.
The key word in that entire theory is immediately. Human evolution prioritized instant gratification over delayed gratification. Our ancestors needed calories today, not next year.
This completely explains why bad habits are so easy to form.
Right. The reward for smoking a cigarette is immediate, a hit of nicotine, a momentary reduction in stress. The punishment, like lung cancer or heart disease, is decades away.
And conversely, it explains why good habits are so excruciatingly hard to form. The punishment for going for a run is immediate. You're sweating, your lungs burn, your legs ache. But the reward, a strong heart, a fit physique, is months or years away in the future.
So the delayed reward doesn't trigger the dopamine hit required to wire the habit.
Exactly. We're fighting our own evolutionary biology. We have to artificially attach an immediate reward to our good habits so the brain registers it as a success.
How do we manufacture an immediate reward for something that takes months to pay off?
One of the most effective low-tech tools for this is a habit tracker.
Like having a physical wall calendar and crossing off the days with a big red marker.
It seems almost childishly simple, but neurologically it is profoundly effective. Let's say your goal is to write a novel, and your habit is writing for 10 minutes a day. The ultimate reward of holding your published book in your hands is years away. It provides zero motivation today.
Right, none at all.
But when you finish your 10 minutes of writing and you walk over to the calendar and draw a thick, satisfying red X over the day, you are giving your brain an immediate visual reward.
Oh, I see. The act of checking the box releases a tiny hit of dopamine. You feel a sense of completion. And as you build a streak of check marks over a few weeks, a secondary motivation kicks in. Your new goal becomes, don't break the chain. The visual proof of your consistency becomes its own satisfying reward.
And of course, to break a bad habit, we invert the final law. Make it unsatisfying. You must add an immediate, tangible cost to the bad behavior.
Give me an example.
This is why accountability partners are so effective. If you make a contract with a friend that you have to literally hand them $50 every single time you skip your morning run, skipping that run suddenly has an immediate, painful financial cost. The brain registers the punishment and avoids the behavior.
Okay, so we've mapped out the entire loop. We have the 4 laws. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying.
That's the core system.
But I want to zoom out and look at the long game. Because starting a habit is one thing. Sustaining it for a lifetime is another. The first week of a new routine is usually fun. You're highly motivated, you bought new running shoes, you have a shiny new app. But what happens in week 5? When it's raining outside, you're tired, and the initial excitement has completely evaporated. How do we keep going?
Sustaining a habit requires us to manage our boredom. And to explain how we do that, the literature introduces a concept called the Goldilocks rule.
I love the illustration they use for this rule. To show what sustained motivation looks like, they trace the career of the legendary comedian Steve Martin.
It's a masterclass in long-term habit maintenance.
Most of us know Steve Martin as this massive explosive success. He was selling out entire arenas in the late 1970s. But his rise to fame was definitely not an overnight montage. It took him 15 grueling years.
15 years of grinding, repetitive work in total obscurity.
He started when he was a teenager, performing magic and comedy in these tiny empty clubs around Los Angeles. And I mean painfully empty. Sometimes he was delivering his routine to a room where the only audience members were the bartender and someone asleep in a booth.
That sounds miserable.
And his original act was incredibly short. He would be on stage for maybe 2 minutes.
Stand-up comedy is brutal. Facing an empty room or a crowd that is staring at you in dead silence is a terrifying psychological experience. The rejection is immediate. So how did he stick with that habit for a decade and a half without quitting?
He didn't try to jump from a 2-minute act to an hour-long special. He slowly, methodically expanded his routine. He would add just 1 or 2 minutes of new material a year. He kept the jokes he knew worked to guarantee he'd get some laughs and feel a sense of success. And he tested tiny bits of new material to challenge himself.
That delicate balance is the essence of the Goldilocks rule. Human beings experience peak motivation when we work on tasks that are right on the edge of our current abilities. The task cannot be too hard, and it cannot be too easy. It has to be just right.
Let's use a physical analogy. Imagine playing a game of tennis. If you step onto the court and play a serious match against a 4-year-old child, you're going to be bored instantly. It's way too easy. There's no challenge, so your motivation drops to 0.
But if you step onto the court and your opponent is Serena Williams, you are going to be completely obliterated. The challenge is so overwhelmingly difficult that you feel helpless. Your motivation drops to 0, and you want to quit.
But if you play against someone who is your exact equal a match, where you win some points and they win some points, and you have to stretch your physical limits just to keep up, that is when you are fully engaged. Your focus narrows. You enter what psychologists call a flow state.
You need just enough victories to keep you satisfied, and just enough mistakes to keep you working hard. Steve Martin was always playing on the edge of his ability. Adding 1 minute of new material was a challenge of just manageable difficulty.
It's all about adjusting that friction.
Exactly. So to sustain a habit, you have to constantly adjust the friction. Once your 2-minute habit becomes boring and easy, you expand it to 5 minutes. You have to actively keep yourself in that Goldilocks zone to stave off boredom.
Aside from managing boredom, the sources point to another massive force that sustains our habits over the long term. And it comes from outside of us. It comes from the people around us.
We're talking about the power of social norms, drawing heavily on Albert Bandura's social learning theory,
which argues that we don't learn in a vacuum, we learn by watching others.
Humans are profoundly social creatures. From an evolutionary standpoint, for thousands of years, our physical survival depended entirely on belonging to the tribe. If you were cast out of the tribe, you starved or were eaten.
That's intense.
It is, but it means our brains are deeply biologically wired to conform to the norms of our social group. We imitate the behaviors we see around us to ensure we fit in.
This has massive implications for our habits. If you are part of a friend group where everyone values physical fitness and their idea of a fun Saturday is going for a group run or a hike, you are highly likely to adopt running as a habit.
Right, you want the social rewards.
The praise, the inclusion, the feeling of belonging. The habit becomes attractive because it secures your place in the tribe.
Conversely, if you want to quit drinking, but your entire social circle, your family, and your coworkers constantly invite you to the bar, Quitting is going to require superhuman effort.
Because you're fighting conformity.
Exactly. You aren't just fighting a chemical habit, you are fighting a massive biological urge to conform to your tribe. One of the single most effective ways to build better habits is to intentionally join a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior.
Okay, we have covered an incredible amount of actionable, powerful information, but I want to pivot the conversation a bit. We need to put on our critical thinking hats. Self-help books, even brilliant ones, often present their frameworks as universal, foolproof truths. But human lives are messy.
Extremely messy.
We've touched on Dr. Cleo's pushbacks regarding trauma and nonlinear progress, but we also have a major review here from the International Journal of Social Impact, and they raise some very serious structural limitations to the entire Atomic Habits philosophy.
It is essential that we look at the full picture. If we treat this framework like a flawless religion, we're going to feel terrible about ourselves when it eventually fails us.
Let's start by debunking a massive myth that gets parroted constantly in the habit hacking space, the 66-day myth. I hear this everywhere online. It takes exactly 21 days or exactly 66 days to form a new habit. Where does that even come from?
That number gets thrown around as a magic threshold, as if on day 67, your brain just takes over completely. But the science shows a drastically different reality. That 66-day number is just an average drawn from one specific, widely cited study.
Okay, so what's the real timeline?
If you actually read the study, the true range for a habit to form was anywhere from 18 days to 254 days.
254 days. That is more than 8 months of daily effort to wire a single habit.
Exactly. The timeline depends entirely on the complexity of the behavior and the circumstances of the individual. A simple habit, like drinking a glass of water the moment you wake up, might take a few weeks to become truly automatic.
That makes sense.
But a highly complex habit, like driving to the gym and lifting weights for an hour after a deeply stressful day of work, could take 8 or 9 months of conscious, difficult effort before it feels natural.
So we need to completely stop counting days. We have to stop looking for a magical finish line and just focus on casting the votes. It takes as long as it takes.
Precisely. Now, the critique from the International Journal of Social Impact goes much deeper than timelines. They point out that Clear's book, and really the entire genre of modern Western self-help, is heavily biased toward a highly individualistic context.
I found this part of the research fascinating. What does that bias actually look like in practical terms?
It means the framework hyper-focuses on individual responsibility. It operates on the assumption that if you just design your environment perfectly, if you just use the right psychological triggers, you have total control over your destiny. But this completely ignores massive, crushing, systemic barriers.
We're talking about socioeconomic realities, privilege.
Yes. Think about the advice to make it obvious and design your environment. If a tech worker working from home wants to eat better, they can easily order fresh organic fruit and put it on their spacious kitchen counter.
Sure.
But what about a single parent working 3 jobs just to pay rent, who lives in a food desert where the only accessible grocery store is a gas station? Telling them to just habit stack their meal prep isn't just unhelpful, it's incredibly tone deaf. Poverty, systemic exhaustion, and a lack of physical resources are massive barriers that a clever environmental hack cannot simply fix.
The environment they're trying to design is inherently systemically hostile to the habits they want to build. The friction isn't just mental, it's financial and structural.
Furthermore, the academic review notes that in collectivist cultures, behavior is much more heavily dictated by family obligations, community needs, and societal expectations than by individual desires. The idea of molding your entire physical world strictly to serve your personal, individual goals is a distinctly Western, often affluent perspective.
And we also have to bring Dr. Cleo back in here regarding our internal biology. We talked about trauma earlier, but she also highlights the reality of neurodivergence and chronic illness.
Yes, Dr. Cleo points out that internal states can easily override even the most perfectly designed environmental cues. The framework assumes a neurotypical brain with a standard reservoir of executive function. But if you suffer from ADHD, chronic fatigue syndrome, clinical depression, or severe anxiety disorders, your brain's executive function is fundamentally compromised.
You could use the third law perfectly. You could reduce all the friction. You could lay out your workout clothes right next to your bed the night before, making the cue totally obvious and easy. But if you wake up in the grip of a severe depressive episode, or you're experiencing executive dysfunction from ADHD, those clothes on the floor aren't going to trigger a workout. They're just going to sit there and trigger immense guilt.
Exactly. The overwhelming internal state completely overrides the clever external cue. The habit loop breaks down because the brain physically cannot initiate the response.
So, hearing all of this, the fact that progress is a messy, chaotic scribble, that systemic barriers and poverty are very real, that mental health and neurodivergence profoundly impact our ability to function, how should someone listening to this view a book like Atomic Habits? If we take these academic critiques seriously, does the framework fall apart?
It doesn't fall apart, but it requires the right framing. You should view these 4 laws not as a magical cure-all, but as an exceptionally practical operating manual. It provides you with a set of tools to reduce the friction in your life. But like any set of tools, they require a skilled, realistic, and compassionate operator.
You have to combine the cold logic of the tactics with profound self-compassion.
Exactly. You use the tools to design your life the absolute best you can within your given circumstances. But you also have to honor your own mental health. You have to recognize your socioeconomic realities. And above all, you need the patience to accept that your progress will be messy. You will fail. You will slide backward. The system will occasionally break down.
And when it does, it is not a failure of your moral character or a lack of willpower. It is just the reality of being a complex human being.
That is a deeply grounded, healthy way to approach self-improvement. You build the best system you can, but you grant yourself grace when the system cracks. And then, when you're ready, you just try to cast one more tiny vote for your future self the next day.
It's about resilience, not perfection. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's distill the massive journey we've been on today. If you take nothing else away from this conversation, remember this. You do not need massive overnight changes to transform your reality. You don't need the cinematic movie montage. You don't need an explosion of motivation.
You just need to focus on getting 1% better.
Stop obsessing over the finish line. Let go of the massive goal and start focusing obsessively on the daily system. Remember that every single action you take is a vote cast for the type of person you wish to become. You don't need a unanimous vote to change your identity. You just need a majority.
Master the art of showing up. Use the 2-minute rule to shrink your biggest obstacles down to an undeniable size. And use the 4 laws to rewrite your neurological loops. Make your good habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. And mercilessly make your bad habits invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying.
And as you do all of this, expect the journey to be a messy scribble. Remember that winners and losers often share the exact same goals. The only difference is the system they build to get there. The tools we explore today are the blueprints for that system.
But as you build that system, be incredibly kind to yourself.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. It's a metaphor drawn directly from the sources, and it captures the essence of everything we've talked about today. It's a concept called the plateau of latent potential.
It's one of the most powerful visuals in behavioral psychology.
Think about the process of building a new habit, like trying to melt an ice cube, sitting on a table in a freezing cold room. Let's say the room's 25 degrees. You start putting in the work. You apply heat. You show up every day. The temperature in the room rises to 26 degrees, then 27, 28, 29. You are working so incredibly hard, but you look at the ice cube and it hasn't changed. It looks exactly the same.
30 degrees, 31 degrees.
Still nothing. All of your hard work, all your daily votes seem completely invisible. It feels like you are failing. It feels like the system is broken. But then the temperature hits 32 degrees and suddenly the ice begins to melt. The melting wasn't the result of that one final degree of heat. It was the accumulated result of all the invisible work you did from 25 to 31 degrees.
The work was never wasted. It was simply being stored.
So ask yourself, what is a habit or a dream you gave up on because you didn't see results immediately? What goal did you abandon because the dramatic montage wasn't happening fast enough, not realizing you were just a few degrees away from a massive breakthrough? Keep showing up. Keep casting the votes. Keep applying the heat. The melting point might be much closer than you think.